Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. My name is Don Davis, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies manage complexity and increase performance. So this episode is going to be a bit different. Chris Connor from the from Life Science Marketing Radio is with me, and we're actually going to be talking about our recap of favorite episodes from the year. We're also going to talk a little bit about the industry as well. And so with that, welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Don. I'm excited to do this. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, one of the things that I've said repeatedly as well, whenever I do solo videos, it takes all this preparation, and then you feel a bit like, you're just talking to yourself, and it's a lot better whenever I have somebody that I can interact with. So thank you for being here. I appreciate that that aspect of it.
I feel the same way. I mean, making a video of yourself talking is the hardest thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. So I mean, I had some really good interviews this year. I definitely appreciate everybody that's been on, but obviously in a podcast, we can only do so many. And so, Chris had sent me this nice little list of 5, and I was like, that's probably what we should do is about 5. And so, so for everybody, we're going to do 5 and 5. So we'll do 5 episodes from Life Science Marketing Radio, and then we'll do 5 episodes from Life Science Success Podcast. And, I definitely appreciate every guest that's been on. It's not to demean anybody that has been on and been interviewed and things like that, but we used, a bit of the data, as well as, actually, looking through, some of our favorites as well. Chris, I think that your approach is the same.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so many good episodes. I enjoy every episode I do, right? And I just feel like it's a privilege to get all this information from people. When I look through the data, first of all, any episode that was launched last January has had a longer life, right? So the data always favors, to a degree, the older episodes. And then there's just some that made an impact on me, or I think are particularly useful. And I think my collection of 5 kind of covers a range of parts of the industry and types of people, or, career oriented, marketing oriented, customer oriented, et cetera.
Yeah. And if anybody sees me going, looking away, it's because I'm clicking on the web pages and things like that, so that you'll be able to see the episodes as well as we go through. Just making sure that the web pages are refreshed and ready for us to go as we get started here. So why don't we start off? Chris, we could just start off with one of yours, one of your episodes here. And do you want to try and introduce it?
Yeah, this one was, market shaping and staffing for commercial companies pre-launch. So the conversation here was with Maureen Franco and Mike Hodson of Pre-Commercial. And the conversation was around how does a biotech company with their first commercial product, when do they decide to start thinking about the commercial process? Because there was a survey, I forget which publication specifically, it's in the notes, says that the companies that are successful, that meet or beat their forecasts, started commercial 2 years before the launch. And it's fascinating to me. I haven't worked specifically in a biotech company, but I know the effort is all in getting something approved. And you think, or I would think, if we don't get it approved, commercial doesn't matter. But the reality is, you get it approved, if you haven't started commercial, it's going to fail anyway. So that was, I thought, an important lesson. I've heard it from a number of people, but that was a particularly good episode on that topic.
Yeah, it was from farmexec.com. I looked it up while you were talking, so I'll play a little bit of the the middleman here.
Awesome.
so yeah, the survey was from farmexec.com. Yeah, I definitely I enjoyed it as well. So I went through it as well in preparation for the episode here, and definitely I can agree with a lot of the things that they said. The one big thing that I would say that I took away from what they had said was you have to look at this idea of of doing this, as defining it and positioning it as well, and allowing yourself the room to pivot, which, I constantly talk about as well with my guests, that, this, having the ability to pivot, and be aware of the ability to pivot is important.
Yeah, I would say that just broadly from what I see in marketing and my own experience. I mean, I think I pivoted my own company almost annually around this time of year. But anybody who gets their positioning for a drug or some other big product launch right on the first try, I think that's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things they talk about at the very end, which I thought was really interesting as well, was this idea of, hiring your first commercial person on the team, which you could just envision being an extremely lonely place. A lot of the places that I've worked, the early startups that I've worked with as well, they normally don't hire a marketing person very early, and then they sort of contract it out, or deal with things that way, and then eventually they'll hire a first salesperson, right? So that's normally what I've seen in the past.
Yeah, and then so what Maureen and Mike were emphasizing, or they pointed out, is that first commercial person is often, because these are new startups, an educator of the internal team as much as the external market, right? Explaining these are the things that have to happen, and this is why it's important, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. So very good. All right. So number one out of the gate here for the Life Science Marketing Radio podcast.
All
All
right.
right. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I mean, how are we going to do this? I guess you're going to do the next one. You're going to tell us about customer service with Ron Kaufman.
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk about. It was interesting to me with Ron Kaufman. So I've been in organizations where they needed kind of a organizational shift, and Ron and I had talked a lot via email and things like that, even prior to this interview. Just because I've enjoyed his writing and things like that. He's got, I think, 15 books or something like that, currently out. He's rated as a global guru for customer service as well. And so, in this particular episode, we go a little bit deeper into kind of how he got his start, what made him the global service guru, and then kind of what preceded things as well. And it was interesting to me to hear. So he talks about his journey of becoming this person that is really focused on customer service, and with it he sort of talks about the fact that early on in his career, he gets this phone call to come teach people in Singapore, about customer service. And so if you think about, Singapore Airlines always comes to mind for me, because they're rated really highly for customer service, and I think that was one of his clients for a long time, was Singapore Airlines, and it's just one of these conversations where it's almost like talking to somebody that's well known in the industry for something around customer service was fabulous for me as well. And there's a lot that people can take away from it, right? I felt like one of the key parts of the conversation is that he talks about his 6 levels of service, and I'll have to read them here, but they're the first one is criminal, right? So if you see what's going on right now with Southwest Airlines, and I know that they've been rated high for customer service in the past, but right now, if you're stuck in the terminal for a week or whatever and can't get out of an airport, that's a good example of criminal service. Then there's basic service. There's what you expect, or expected level of service is another one. Desired, so what you want people to do. Surprising, and then unbelievable. And when he says it, he has this inflection on surprising, and then it's unbelievable. So he really sort of emphasizes those words, more or less to say that these are the perspectives of your client. It's not the perspective that you have about your service. It's about, sort of, what, when you ask somebody, what would they say that your service is? And you could hear somebody say, I feel like your service is unbelievable. So yeah, great interview.
Yeah. The things that stood out to me just from your explaining this is one, you refer to Singapore Airlines, which I have no personal experience with, but I've heard from people who've flown there. And then if you're being recruited to Singapore to teach customer service, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then when I saw the list of 6 levels of service, that got my attention too, from criminal to unbelievable. But also I'm thinking, as a positioning exercise, you can choose which of those 6 you want to be. Hopefully, not the first one.
Right.
But, there are resources to be, like, you could be known for unbelievable customer service, or you could say, you know what, in our industry, that's not a differentiator. We're going to go with desired and put our money somewhere else.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, there's so much for life science companies to think about, as well as if you did it in your journey of creating the company versus sort of getting to a point where you're known for criminal service and then having to go back. It will be a much more painful exercise to move from criminal to unbelievable. So it would be better if you could just, start with the thought in mind that, hey, I want my positioning to be that people refer to me as, or my organization is unbelievable. So,
yes, for sure.
All right. So, right along the same line in my mind was customer obsession for you. So I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah. So Michelle Benton runs an agency called Lime, and they are not a strategy organization and they're not a training organization, but she helps companies sort of build the infrastructure to do marketing right, life science companies specifically. And she mentioned that, in a lot of life science companies, unlike consumer companies, marketers might be treated or seen as second-class citizens, so like almost a necessary evil. She didn't say that. I'm saying that. But she just thought it's important to build marketing competence and systems and infrastructure to do things right. And then she brings up, Yeti as an example for doing marketing that talks about the customer moments that matter. I don't know if you've seen any of the Yeti videos, but they're always just showing their product being used in, I would say, unbelievable or desirable situations. You see how they're being used by people who are doing amazing things.
Huh.
And that's what life science is about, right? To a large degree. So just understanding what marketing is, a lot of marketers in life science come from the sciences and don't get enough marketing training, even though I saw a tweet last week that stated the exact opposite. I go, that hasn't been my experience. Most of the marketers have a science background, and you don't necessarily, you can learn the science. I would take a better marketer, honestly. So, but this was the most downloaded episode of the year. I'll just throw that out by far. So that's a recommendation for that episode.
Yeah, I think I felt like there's sort of this thing in our world where with podcasting where people, say that talking about more controversial things actually does help, with the downloads as well. And so, I felt like in a couple of different instances, she sort of poses this friction, if you will, of things that you should consider. And that's where the Yeti example came for me, was like, they thought a little bit differently about the market. They could go back out and be another cooler provider, or they could show kind of, again, to your point about their videos, showing the difference that you could have, but also design a cooler. It's funny that as we're having this conversation, I have my Yeti water bottle here. And the one thing is it keeps ice for more than 24 hours. If I leave the water bottle overnight on my desk and I come back, it'll still have my ice cubes there. it's my favorite water bottle from that standpoint. That yeah, I mean, they really designed well, but they also sort of give you this image of differentiating things, and I think it's something that you could take away whenever you look at developing the next drug or the next diagnostic or what have you inside of life science as well.
Right. It's just good storytelling for them. And that's how I would wrap up the Yeti example is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, I felt like the part of, being a little bit more, controversial. I felt like the second class citizen statement was one thing. And the biggest challenge that I've had with marketing inside of a lot of the organizations that I've worked in is that a lot of the stuff that is produced is not measurable. So let's say if you produce a brochure, you go to a conference, the output of either the conference or the brochure might be some level of a campaign that was meant to sort of drive a product forward. And in that, the product moving forward, was it the product, was it the salesperson, was it the brochure? I mean, it's hard to sort of ground yourself in the measurement of like the specific thing that delivered that, that and that's been my experience throughout, is that senior executives frequently will cut marketing budgets, and it's oftentimes because of the fact that they look at it as, that there's stuff that we could do, but there's other stuff that we could do too.
Yeah. On that note, since we're talking about measurability and attribution, I'll just throw out an episode and, well, a guest who, not necessarily the episode he did with me, but Chris Walker on LinkedIn runs an agency called Refine Labs, and they do marketing for SaaS companies. But his whole point of view, which I think is still applicable in life sciences, is that attribution is sort of a bit of a trap. Not that you shouldn't do things that you can measure, but we vastly undervalue the things that we can't measure, like podcasts, et cetera. And if you pay attention, you can find out how people found out about you and eventually attributed those things. But just because you can't measure it doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I feel like it's like a snowball rolling downhill in part, right? I mean, it's, it's all of these additive things that wound up being, whatever it is, but at the same time, it's, just really, really interesting, for sure to see that she positioned it like that. She also talked about, sort of this digital approach, right? Figuring out digital marketing or omni-channel, or how does digital marketing, change the customer experience, right? Overall was something else that she mentioned towards the end of the episode that I picked up on as well.
Yeah. And I think, we might talk a little bit more about a similar thing down the line here.
Yeah, right. All right. So why don't we move over to Kyle Giffen, with Latch Bio. So I have to say that, I mean, this was probably the most interesting and different style video, from the standpoint of they took a group of people, came together and more or less said, we want to go develop a product. And one of the individuals, Kenny, in the group, essentially, had worked in the lab before and was, somebody that had designed software that people use. And so I mean, it was really interesting to kind of see how their journey came along. He talks about also the fact that they created a dating app first. So they created that first, and but came back to this idea of, hey, we want to, develop a company together, and we'd like to, do something here. Where's the problem that we can actually fix? And so they saw sort of this problem and went out and interviewed like 100 companies plus. And from that's where Latch Bio came from. But they essentially do like biostats and biocomputing software. Their motto is something like, wanting to to revolutionize the biocomputing platform. So yeah.
Yeah. So this one interested me partly because I see a lot about no code tools, popping up on my Twitter and LinkedIn feeds recently, which I think includes tools like Notion. But I see a lot of productivity bros on Twitter hyping no code tools, many of which I use, like Canva, for example,
Right.
which is hugely useful to a lot of companies. So that's interesting. But from your description right there, that's seemed to me an exceptional marketing and company building journey to go out and say, what is a problem that we can solve? Not, I've got an idea, everybody's going to love this thing,
Right.
right? So that's how you do it. I think in the ideal situation, you talk to a lot of people and say, well, based on what right? You must have a background skill set. How could I be helpful? And let them tell you.
Yeah. So if you look up, I don't know if the picture is still the same, but if you look up Kyle Giffen on LinkedIn, the picture used to be all of the senior executives with like Blues Brothers glasses on as well. So none of them, it was like they had like, maybe a dress shirt on or whatever, and then Blues Brothers glasses. And it was kind of funny to me, as well, because it just showed, like this sort of, coming out of UC Berkeley and, just sort of their overall evolution. And if memory serves me right, they're venture backed, which, goes back to this idea of, one, good storytelling, the ability to sort of, piece everything together. Two, this idea of, sort of listening to people about the problems that are going on in the industry and sort of moving forward from that. So it was, I felt like it was a great, just a great conversation. But like I said, I felt like it was quite a bit different than some of the other interviews, because it just felt like the story sort of unfolded naturally through the conversation a lot better.
Nice. Yeah. Well, different is always good, or most often can be good,
Yeah,
right? It's something unexpected. You're going to pay attention, and it's good for them because they, it makes their telling their story easier because it is so different.
Yeah. All right. So with that, we want to go to managing distribution and talk a little bit about managing distributors in the long game.
Yeah. So Drew Hamilton is a distributor. He works with distributors at Vista Lab Technologies. And he's also, I think he sells some direct and works with lots of distributors. He's got like 200 people that he's working with. And he reached out to me just to talk about this challenge because I'd not had anybody like that on my podcast in the past. And I don't have a sales background. So I'm always fascinated how people, one, just get good at sales, but two, how he manages all those people and what his day-to-day looks like. And the keys for him were, I would say, it comes down to two things: being human and being helpful. And when we talk about the long game, that's my other question, is when you're getting started in sales, and you don't have those relationships, how do you put food on the table? But somehow he manages, maybe with a base salary for a while and some commission, and then it grows. But he just made sure that he reaches out to people on a regular basis by email or call. And some, if it's an email, maybe it's a blast to the whole 200 or a specific subset. He made a big point of letting people know, particularly in the pandemic, what was in stock, maybe timelines for getting things and so on, because obviously with all the supply chain challenges, that was a big concern for people. And just over communicating to people was helpful, as opposed to, even if you don't have it, as opposed to just ignoring people and then letting them know when the product shows up. Knowledge is comfort, right? So there's that. And then, on the human side, he just talked about he will rarely, if ever, wear a shirt with a Vista Lab brand on it. He just tries to be a regular guy. He builds these relationships, and he made a big point of talking about sending his Christmas cards, which I got this year, which is very nice.
How about that?
Pictures of his family and just normal goofy stuff. This is who he is. But it resonates with people. I mean, I would much prefer to get this card than some corporate card with a corporate message on saying how much they value my business, right? I mean,
yeah,
I'm going to send him a card, but anybody who sends me a corporate card isn't getting one back. Let's put it that way, right? So
yeah.
I really enjoyed that one.
Yes, personalized was something that I took away from that whole conversation about wearing branded clothing or whatever. The part where he was managing 200 distributors, I mean, just shocked me because so I've worked with people who install equipment and things like that inside of healthcare facilities, and with that, oftentimes they're seen almost like distributors. They're not necessarily repping products, but they're actually out there representing your company by what they do. And it's a real job. I mean, and to have 200 of them, I mean, I could only imagine what it's like, sort of, especially because he was talking about supply chain shortages. And I was just like, I could only imagine, I mean, sure, an email blast is fine, but I mean, at the same time, whenever you get shorted, I don't know, 3 times in a row or whatever, he talks about overcoming one specific challenge in the episode as well that, they sort of came together and figured out a solution for. And I was really impressed by, the fact that he could do it, because I would struggle managing 200 distributors.
Yeah, I would have trouble managing 2, probably. That's not my skill set. But yeah, it's impressive. And I just kind of overwhelmed at the scale of, that's just a window into the scale of the industry and how many people it takes on the ground just to get stuff to the door.
Right. Yeah. And they approach, I believe it's like research and some other part of the industry as well. So they had two aspects of their organization that I picked up on in the episode as well, I believe. I don't remember what.
Yeah, I think it was healthcare is what you're talking about.
Okay.
But
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, just very big, broad sort of approach in addition to a lot of distributors, but that's probably what helps them sort of approach both the industries. So.
Yeah, good lesson. I'll just finish up by saying good lesson for people, maybe scientists who want to get into sales to learn how things are done, what it's like. So
yeah. And I mean, if you have to, I think the other thing to take away, and I feel like a few people that I've worked with directly have gotten this as well, is that there are lots of ways to skin the cat whenever you need a sales force, right? I mean, you could go do it direct. I mean, that's probably the easiest from a control standpoint, but hardest to actually implement, versus the other way of, going down the distributor route of, actually, looking at, are there other people in my industry that could help me do this while I'm sort of scaling my organization as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. Good thought. All right. We're moving on to sales enablement.
Yes. We'll talk about sales enablement with Jassy Chadha. So interesting enough, right? So I have clients in the space that actually, focus in on sales operations and things like that. And they have some of these tools from Axtria. So it was exciting for me to get to actually interview Jassy as well and have a conversation. And as an individual, I mean, he's impressive as an individual. He essentially, sort of went through school with a lot of really, grounded people from an entrepreneurial standpoint, and a lot of good people to look at, in the space. But then also he's sort of, if you look at like the leadership library that they've built for Axtria, they have a ton of videos where he's just sitting there being interviewed by somebody, where they're asking him questions and then he's answering. And I just thought, as an employee inside of Axtria, I couldn't think of anything more valuable, because what your leader's thinking. He's put it in video. He said it, he's told you what he's thinking. And I felt like getting to interview somebody like this again was, just a real treat for me, overall, to just get to interview him. They are venture backed. So actually just received like over $100 million or $200 million or something of venture capital. So, just great to see sort of something grow from, hey, there's a problem in the industry where sales reps need information as they go into facilities to be able to know exactly, what to sell to the people that they're serving. And where this where this sort of comes home to me is that I've been in organizations where there are entire teams of 30 to 50 people that are managing like a giant series of spreadsheets, or a sort of a giant Tableau workbook that serves up information that says, hey, when you go to see this doctor in this facility, you should be talking to them about their use of this particular drug or whatever. And that's where a lot of the tools that Axtria has come into play. So again, just a real pleasure for me to get to interview him.
Yeah, it sounds, one, like an interesting journey again for the company. Two, handling sales enablement and educating reps before they talk to customers might be something we talk about a little bit at the end of the whole episode here, because I think that's moving. I've seen it, the spreadsheet. I've seen kind of a wiki approach. I've seen SharePoint approaches, but really being able to get that information on demand for the right customer is huge. And also huge is the value of a founder or a CEO laying out their expectations for people and just sort of where we're going and how we're getting there and how we're doing on video for your own company. I just think that's incredibly valuable and smart.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think that the whole idea that they started with as a company was taking the power away from like consultants and spreadsheets and moving it, into the hands of the sales reps and things like that. And I just, again, really impressed with the leader, and really enjoyed the interview. Kind of back to your original statement of, I don't think any of my babies are ugly. So unfortunately, whenever people ask me like favorite podcast, it's a really hard thing to come up with. But at the same time, I mean, this one I greatly enjoyed for sure. Getting to interview Jassy and talk about Axtria and what it is that they do. So yeah.
Yeah, it is a privilege to interview these people. And if I'm listening to someone else's podcast, it's a privilege to hear from them. Yeah. Like it's a treat, and it's so easy. So there's a plug for podcasting right there. So
yeah. All right. Improving the patient journey.
Yes. So Betsy Bennett, I discovered her because of something on LinkedIn. Someone else might have commented on a post of hers, or she posted a comment on someone else. But I thought she'd be interesting because she's a psychologist and she works with marketers. But when I interviewed her, I learned a lot more than that, in that she has been a cancer patient twice, not once, but twice. And wow. So as a psychologist and a patient, she has a lot to say about what's helpful and what's not when you're trying to communicate with patients and get their attention and get them to think about asking their doctor if your product might be right for them. And she just pointed out that a lot of what she sees is, unhelpful things about, gratitude or healthy recipes and so on, which she can find anywhere else. And really understanding the problems of a cancer patient, for example, which include, a lot of stress, of course, but also, changes in your relationships with other people, and how do you deal with that? Because there are a lot of people who, with no bad intent, have trouble dealing with your cancer diagnosis. And so that's a burden
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
patient, right?
Yeah.
And so understanding that, I think, it made a big impression on me, and just coming from someone who's dealt with this whole thing twice, and she seems to be doing fine now, but um, that was informative. And then kind of her other thing, advice to marketers, particularly agencies, was it's common, in agencies, you can hire a lot of young people cheap who will work hard and stay up all night and so on, but don't really have the life experience to think about what older patients might actually be thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. The interesting part for me was she said that in the interview, she said she doesn't normally post on LinkedIn. Somebody posted something that triggered her. So whenever you say that you saw it, that's interesting, because it was, sort of one of these posts. And then she said something about, patient trackers. I'm not familiar with this at all, but this idea of having like an app on your phone or whatever, and the thing that you got to start with is like, does the audience that you're targeting, do they use apps in the first place? And the point that I heard her say at one point was, look, if you're targeting like older people, definitely, you may have a divide there where people just don't use an app. So, think about it that way. And so I was like, yeah, really, all the things that you have to think about as a marketer, but also as an organization as well.
Right. We've come so far to assume, let's say generously middle-aged and live pretty much in a digital world. But, there's value, she pointed out, in printed materials, where if you're going to provide advice or information about a disease state or someone's patient journey to an older person, it might be nice to have something printed that they can read, fall asleep in the easy chair, wake up and continue reading. Right. So, which is, somewhat tongue in cheek, but that's the reality. I'm picturing my dad right now, like, asleep in a chair. Like,
yeah. My Great Dane just decided to join me here to the side. So if anybody happens to hear anything that sounds like a dog crying, it's my my dog deciding that I'm not paying enough attention at the moment. So
the dogs are always welcome.
Part of podcasting as well.
Yeah, my wife asked me, is it okay if the dog's in the room with you? This is not where I usually do my podcast, but it's where the dog hangs out. But I said, she's welcome to stay, but I'm not getting up to open the door for her. She wants out. So
yeah, it's kind of what he wants as well. He probably hears other people in the other parts of the house and is just saying, hey, I'd like to go hang out with them now. Enough of you. So, yeah. All right, so we'll move on to Gary McCausland. So actually, I have not had many guests come back, right? So this is a first sort of second interview for me. Well, I should say a second interview. I'll talk about the first second interview, but this is a first full-length second interview that I've done at all, with any guest. And it was great to have Gary come back and tell everybody about what ACGT Vector is working on and kind of how they're progressing along, and sort of I guess the couple key takeaways to think about with regards to this organization is, number one, if you think about the future of cancer therapies, a lot of them require sort of, you're taking the patient's cells, you're modifying them, and then you're doing something to them and then putting them back, right? So whether it's a CAR T cell therapy or an NK therapy, those definitely are going to require that you have some part of the supply chain be that you're taking cells from a patient, you're sending those cells off for refinement and modification, and then you're bringing them back to the patient again. And the current supply chain for CAR T cell therapy, my understanding, is like 30 days plus. So imagine you're a cancer patient, you're ready, you're sort of reaching the limits of the ability to treat, your type of cancer anyway. on top of that, they're going to extract these cells and they're going to keep you depleted through the entire time while your immune system depleted, the entire time while your cells are off being modified. They come back and then they, get placed back in you. And sort of what ACGT Vector is looking to solve is like, can we move the supply chain much closer to the patient? So they've actually developed a what do you call a bioprocessing center inside of a semi trailer. To use, our terms. This is done in Europe, so I'm sure that they call it like a lorry trailer. They have some other word for it in Europe, but my word for it is a semi trailer, and pretty impressive that they could pull this off. And then they've actually got sort of their first series of clients as well. In addition to that, I've talked to them in the past about vaccine production as well, because this idea of sort of, I mean, if you look at what's going on right now in China is, I think, a perfect example. Let's say they come up with a new variant rather than, like producing the next whatever vaccine, very close to us, in the supply chain. What about, having those initial sort of developments happen much closer to where the actual infection is happening is something that would be advantageous for an organization like ACGT Vector to get involved. So,
yeah, I think that's a phenomenal business model. Again, people thinking differently. Really, I mean, I wouldn't have thought of that. Like, first of all the regulatory stuff pops to the top of my head, which I'm not an expert in, but I just picture like, you're going to do what, where?
Yeah.
But why not? I mean, the alternative is that somehow those cells are being transported by something, maybe a semi trailer or aircraft or whatever, which has its own risks, right? What if they deplete your immune system and the helicopter goes down?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's just an interesting thing. And then the idea of being able to do that, because I don't know what the size of the market for cell and gene therapy is, but I'm trying to picture the scale of the space required for the number of patients you would have at any one time. Probably doesn't require enormous bioreactors,
right.
But a few small ones in trailers at every hospital seems reasonable. I don't know if that's the case or not, but
yeah, I mean, even picking like metro centers, right? I mean, I grew up in a small town in Indiana, so and I frequently tell my family, I'm like, look, they're great whenever it comes to sort of, you have, the common cold or whatever, fine, but the minute that you have a major sort of thing going on with your health, you should probably not just stay in those sort of local regional areas, because problem is they oftentimes don't have access to new technology. Now, what I see with some of this is that, maybe there's a future where, the larger metro areas, again, have maybe something like this that's more central to, 3 or 5 hospitals or something, rather than it being, even if I use an example, a bigger example of like MD Anderson, rather than having something right at MD Anderson, having something that, all the local hospitals could use, would be pretty phenomenal, I think, for everybody. So, yeah.
Right. Now, I like this idea a lot, and I think it's innovative and it's smart, and that's thinking about problems, solving real problems, and just to point out, there are problems aside from making your drug that are important.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's so many steps. The drug is one of them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's talk about Intern for the Win-Win-Win.
Yeah, this one I picked because it was fun. And I think, on Life Science Marketing Radio, we mostly talk about marketing or a little bit about sales, but I also like to throw in some things around careers. And this one got my attention. I was just, Bob Lemke had been a guest on my podcast before, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, what's new? What's going on?" And he goes, "Oh, I got a cool story for you. We got this intern, Sunethra Kannan." And so Bob Lemke's company, Mobile Locker, makes software that sales reps use to for sales enablement, basically, and talking to doctors. But so Sunethra got an internship with AbbVie in their aesthetics division. I'm not sure if I'm recalling the name of that part or not. But anyway, so she was assigned to work with Mobile Locker to sort of set up the accounts inside of AbbVie. And so they built this relationship. But as happens, every internship comes to an end. And they had been so happy with how things were going and that she already knew what was going on that Mobile Locker said, what if during this school year right now, we hire you to continue doing this? So she went from being paid by the customer to being paid by the vendor to do this thing. And now she's not only, because she's become sort of an expert in the system, she's also working with other clients of Mobile Locker as well. So it just worked out really well, of course, for Mobile Locker, because they get to keep someone who's already trained. It works out well for her as an intern because she gets to keep earning some money during the school year on a job that she already knows. And it worked out for AbbVie because they have someone continuing to set up accounts for them who's already fully trained. They don't have to find a new person or shift it over to a regular employee for a while. So it just seemed to be a great solution for everybody. And it just seemed to me like some out of the box thinking about how, you can be helpful to interns and an intern can be helpful to you. I don't have, any specific experience with interns either, but that just seemed like that's a real thing. She's doing a real job. She's getting real experience and it works out for everybody.
Yeah. With one of the organizations that I work for full-time, before I was a consultant, we interviewed, I want to say let's say that there were hundreds of applicants for the intern roles for this organization. And we interviewed 5 different individuals that were potential candidates for being an intern, for the organization. And it was absolutely amazing to see sort of the resumes of some of these interns. And I mean, they're pretty impressive. I mean, so oftentimes it's like, hey, look, I speak multiple languages. I work, here part-time. I also, volunteer, and tutor students. I am, a major part of STEM and robotics club or whatever. I mean, it's just the list just goes on. And I remember asking a few of them, like, do you sleep? I mean, I remember as a student, like, I mean, I needed, like, I don't know, I ate a lot. I played sports and yeah, I mean, that and my academic studies were enough. I didn't need all these additional pressures, I guess.
You and me both. I think Bob said the same thing. Like, I did not have my stuff together like that in college. I mean, I did my homework and, I exercised and hung out with my buddies. That was it.
Yeah, right.
There were no extracurricular work activities. Well, I worked in a lab, so I'll say that, but
yeah, well, I mean, that is something. And I mean, obviously, similarly, Sunethra finds herself in the same situation that she's working and trying to balance school as well. But, great to see the journey, kind of continue on with her as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of impressive young people out there. It's also clearly very competitive. But yeah, it's cool to see these young people who are, so eager to do things. And I think she's already gotten a job offer from someone. I'm not going to say who, only because I don't remember, but she is well on her way to success. So if that's helpful to anybody listening to this, there's some ideas for you.
Excellent. All right. So the other thing I was going to mention, so that I'm not going to bring up the webpage for this, but I'll kind of, move into the next one. The other great one for me was just getting to go to Bio in the Bayou and interview several different companies there. So that was kind of my my last one is actually a series of companies here, but they're very short episodes, which I would almost, add up to be almost equal to a full 30-minute normal episode of Life Science Success. So that was kind of mine. And the companies that I definitely would highlight would be, so there's Paul Romness with OS Therapeutics. They have an osteosarcoma drug that they're working on. He actually mentions the fact that they're, trying to go public as well. So that's pretty impressive as a small startup company. There was Laurie Curley, who has a CRO that's focused in on neuroscience. We talk a little bit about, kind of taking care of the cell cultures and things like that they have for his CRO. They had to do that through the pandemic, which meant that they had to send people into the lab even whenever, we were going through the pandemic, which was, kind of an interesting time as well. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So my very first sort of guest coming back for an interview was Trivia Frazier. She's with Obatala Sciences. They focus they have tissue on a chip. So they have the ability to provide tissue on a chip for people who are, trying to develop, things that would impact different areas of the body there. And then lastly was Chris Garbidian. He has Zontogeny, who's a venture capital firm inside of Life Sciences. And I feel like their approach, there's so many. So I had a conversation. I mean, maybe I'll rewind just a little bit on the venture capital side. So I had a conversation with somebody earlier this week about just trying to do venture capital or approach venture capital differently. And it's primarily because there's this thought process that, the entrepreneur who's running the company has no clue what they're doing. We're going to give them money. They have no clue. And then we want to sort of, run what it is that they're doing and operate things for them. And I felt like Zontogeny's approach isn't that. It's like, look, we have a series of expertise that whenever you become somebody that works with us, that you also gain. And so, I mean, I felt like, they are approaching, venture capital differently. And it's good to see that versus the, hey, we know it all. We know how to run, companies and, here's our money, but, we very much want to take control of things approach, which just seems very strange to me, because if you lose that initial entrepreneurial spirit that caused the creation of the company, it could mean the end. In my mind. Wow. And that's sort of my caution to entrepreneurs as you enter this world is like, be careful with what you sign up for. You look at who the venture capital firm is. This is a dating game. This is not a one, sort of one size approach. And yes, you want somebody's money to be able to go do things, but you got to make sure that they're going to approach it in a way that you can accept.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I'll just point out that I did an interview with Susanna Harris, who no longer works for Zontogeny. She's moved on to another company that I want to talk about in a minute. But, we essentially talked about how they worked and what her job was there, helping those companies with their science communications, their marketing, et cetera, pulling the whole thing together, and a little bit around the whole VC component of Zontogeny, which I thought was an interesting model. So worth checking out.
Yeah. So, Chris, any final comments from you? And then if not, maybe we go to our future, our future thoughts as well in terms of the industry.
No, I don't have any final thoughts. I mean, this has been really fun. I mean, it's a different kind of episode. I don't know about for you, but certainly for me. And even though we had some notes about what we were going to talk about, I enjoyed just the back and forth conversation and tried to picture myself listening to this thing going, yeah, that's the kind of episode I'd want to listen to. I hope people listening agree.
Yeah. Otherwise this could have been a one size or a one presenter me, which doesn't sound like a good thing to me. And then me walking through the list, sort of talking to myself. So yeah, I appreciate you being here, being a part of that. And I appreciate the back and forth as well. I know that I enjoy these sort of, conversations as well. And yeah, just having your wealth of knowledge, here with me is helpful too.
Well, thank you for that. I never think of it as a wealth of knowledge. And when you ask me, like, what do you think about what's going to happen in the industry next year? I had to really scratch my head. Like, I don't typically, I'm not the forecaster, but I do have a few things that on my notes that we can talk about, like that I think are interesting.
Yeah, let's start with that.
So, the first one that popped up for me is artificial intelligence, right? Which has been in the news a lot lately, particularly, I don't know if this happened before Christmas break, if you want to call it that, but the Chat GPT was on fire in the last few weeks. Everybody testing it out and seeing what comes back out of it. And as a marketer, and someone who creates content, you have to think about that. The other side of Life Science Marketing Radio, it lives on a page called CC Life Science, which was intended at the beginning of last year to start investigating artificial intelligence and blockchain. So that's another interest of mine, which I have no background in, but I'm just curious about. And I didn't know, of course, that things like ChatGPT and DALL-E would be on the horizon. But I have conversations with my wife, who's an artist, but formerly a graphic designer, and the impact on that and writing. I realize that we're all using AI a little bit. I mean, it creates the transcripts for my episode.
Yeah.
And I have tested out some writing programs, which I found useful for creating outlines. But my hesitation was, I don't know if what it's feeding me is garbage or not. And it doesn't sound like me, so I have to write it anyway.
Yeah.
Or people would know.
Important point as well. Yeah. So,
but I think it's gonna have an impact, and it remains to be seen. The most optimistic one is that it will turn writers into editors, and maybe we can produce better content faster. It remains to be seen.
Yeah. So I mean, have you actually gone in and tried Chat GPT specifically?
No.
Okay.
To be fair, I have not tried that.
Yeah.
At some point I might. I'm resisting it for probably many reasons. As much as I love technology and the internet and all the amazing things it can do, I'm also a little bit of a Luddite. And I'm resisting those things as well.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, to your point about content for marketers or articles and things like that, my experience has been exactly as yours. You cannot, go in and say, hey, write me a whole article about, artificial intelligence and life sciences, and then turn the robot over to go do that. It's just not, I mean, it's not going to be successful at the end. I mean, parts of what it says, may be helpful, and parts of it, also, very much could challenge you. Google's on the coattails of this as well. I mean, Google certainly is saying, hey, look, we have ways to detect when AI content alone was generated. And in those cases, we're just going to ignore it. We're going to, sort of deprecate its ability, which, I mean, then makes it not searchable. So then any energy that you put into actually getting the article out there that was AI generated, honestly, is a piece of garbage anyway. So you should probably, find other ways to, kind of leverage these tools. Writing outlines for me has been a game changer. So this idea of, go to the Chat GPT and say, hey, look, write me an outline for an article that it relates to AI in life sciences. It'll do a pretty darn good job of that. But then you still have to mix in some of the things that you see in terms of SEO and other stuff to be able to really leverage, the tools. I would say it cuts down some of the time, but to your point, I mean, you're going to have to get in there and actually really write as a part of this. This isn't just turn it over. And then seeing what AI is doing inside of life sciences, I mean, to me, it sort of hones your focus. Right. So it's this a whole idea of taking bigger data sets and trying to figure out how do these big data sets become leverageable by the human being, which, some of this big data, it would take us a long time to understand if ever, without some additional tools. So,
yeah. So I will say creating an outline hugely helpful, because sometimes it's like someone asks you if you've heard any good jokes lately, your mind goes blank. But if you ask a device to say, give me an outline, then you go, oh yeah, those are the things I should talk about. I know those things. Now I have something to say.
Right.
So that is useful. On the other side, I resist it. And I realize there's probably no stopping it, but I do think a little bit about how we give away we're chipping away at our humanity a little bit at a time. And in the long run, I don't think that's good. I don't know how we stop it or we evolve with it. That's just how I think about it.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't disagree at all, but I mean, what impressed me was, I've seen people that actually use it to write like Python scripts and things like that, which I'm not a computer coder. But essentially they go in there and say, hey, look, write me a Python script that does this. Its output seems like it's runnable. and
that's amazing.
That for me sounds, I mean, kind of back to your no code approach for tools. I mean, that's impressive to me, because it's like, yeah, hey, if I had an idea for something that I wanted, and I used to have teams of people that did this with me, could you go create me, something that scrapes the internet for this data? I need, this information. So, yeah.
Yeah. Scraping brings up copyright and other, intellectual property issues. I will say a further example, I was approached by someone to test out an AI that would write my show notes for a podcast based on the transcript. It couldn't even do that well. Like, you can't take the actual words that were in my transcript and make a reasonable set of notes about what the episode was about.
Yeah.
So that was
we used, and like you said, I mean, we use Descript for my show notes, and I feel like it does an okay job. And if anybody ever looks at current show notes, I mean, typically we will have time codes and things like that inside the episodes. I oftentimes don't include the specific transcript because it's just not at a quality that I think I should put out. So.
I take a different approach in that if I use something that Descript, we're talking about the software that transcribes our episodes and allows us to edit. If I'm going to use a quote, then I pull it out and I listen to it and I manually correct it so that it is accurate, completely accurate, because even though I know what they said, you might not.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I actually, I mean, so I'm working a lot both on the pharma side as well as the diagnostic side. I'm impressed with a lot of the future for life science as well. I think that, it will be interesting to see where some of the new, CAR type therapies go, right? So CAR T therapy or NK therapy, where do they go? What are they actually able to deliver, especially in the next year? I mean, I think there's kind of an inflection point that's been building for a while. I agree with you on AI, by the way. I think one of the companies that I'm working with right now, we've been talking a lot about, how AI is involved in the company, and what specifically do we talk about with regards to the sort of the future of what this platform becomes as well. So, I mean, it becomes a part of, that whole discussion that we were talking about earlier with regards to project or product positioning and being able to pivot. We don't want to sort of commit ourselves so far down the line that it has to be a part of, what the future is, because there may be a future where we don't need AI at all. Right. So that we've been talking about, this idea of, do we, disclose a lot about AI and use that as a advantage point for, sort of gaining further capital investment, or do we sort of hold back on that element as well in the future? But I agree with you. I mean, it's sexy and attractive, and a lot of people are, really encouraged by that aspect and less on the science side. So it's like, there's a real advantage to sort of talking about these things.
Yeah, and there are places where AI is going to do things that we cannot do. I've done a couple episodes on AI for drug development. So understanding based on huge amounts of data that have been generated nowhere near financial services or other industries around what compounds work and don't work for different things, or parts of compounds that give you some information about how drugs should be built. Um, I think that's a useful approach
Yeah.
to analyzing data and coming up with ideas for new therapies, which is hugely labor and resource intensive.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then, I mean, the last thing that I really want to see where we wind up with is CRISPR, becoming an actual platform that people are building treatments, from, sort of, can they actually, gene edit to the point of actually, seeing the next generation of drugs come out and things like that and help people. So I think, we're at a great inflection point here for life sciences, and I'm, really looking forward to the next year and seeing what comes, and also looking forward to seeing the next generation of interviews, both on your podcast and mine as well. I mean, I know we're booked out to, I think March right now. I mean, I would imagine, that, there's just a nice lineup of folks that are booked at this point in time.
I have had a long queue. It's narrowing down because I haven't done so many interviews in December. But yeah, I know I'm going to get a lot of other good interviews. The other thing that I'm interested in, it's funny because you mentioned the science things like CRISPR and so on. And as a biologist, I don't think about those as much as you might think. But decentralized science, so DeSci. So I mentioned Susanna Harris, who used to work at Zontogeny. She's moved on to a company called Vibe Bio, which is a decentralized bio company thinking about new therapies, I'm sure, but it's all based on blockchain, not to be confused with the crypto, which I'm sure has, rattled a few cages lately. But, and I wouldn't even be able to describe it right. I know how blockchain works, but it's, as a group, a decentralized science organization might consider where to put their money to invest in certain therapies and trials and so on. And it's just a different way of doing things that I think is going to be in the news one way or the other.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to look them up, because I had this idea earlier on in the year that I thought it would be interesting to go license, 2 or 3 similar technologies from different organizations, and sort of match them up as a portfolio, and build a company from that. And one example would be pick 3 different CRISPR based things that have promise for being potential drug treatments in the future, and that's their sort of basis. But then what happens from that. But decentralized science, to me, sounds like an interesting way to sort of approach a similar sort of problem as well.
Right. So, within the blockchain, they have things called distributed autonomous organizations, a DAO, which is what I believe Vibe Bio is. Apologies to Susanna and the entire team if I'm getting it wrong, but and so the idea is that more people will contribute the ideas and the finances and so on, and determine where their money goes, which is essentially a little bit like a corporation. At some point, somebody has to make a decision, right?
Right.
And the reason we have hierarchical organizations is because there become so many decisions eventually that you can't do them all by group. That's how I look at it. So I'm curious to see the evolution of DAOs inside and outside of life sciences, if that's a concept that can actually, how it will actually work.
It'd be very interesting. So, Chris, where can people find the Life Science Marketing Radio podcast and more information about you?
Yes. So if you go to lifesciencemarketingradio.com, you will find out about me and my business. And if you click on the podcast link, it will take you to cclifescience.substack.com or something like that. And which is where all my content lives now. I moved at the beginning of last year over to Substack just because it's a better experience for me. And honestly, I think it's a better experience for my readers and listeners. It's more like an online magazine, different categories. So the publishing and the consumption, I think, are a better experience than a website over there.
Yeah, I think it works well with whenever I go to find your episodes. So yes, and then of course, follow Chris on LinkedIn as well. And, he frequently puts up both snippets as well as, mentions with regards to guests and podcasts as well. So, there's a lot of great information that you put out. So thank you for being here and not forcing me to be alone, recapping my own episodes all by myself. I greatly appreciate that.
No one wants to be alone on New Year's. So just two old dudes talking about science.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, Chris. And with that, thanks a lot for helping me recap the year. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks.